Han stood in the observation lounge of Horizon's Edge Station, watching the stars outside the massive viewport. She had been a cultural liaison for only 6 months, and already she felt exhausted. The diplomatic meetings between humans and the dragged on for hours every day. Both sides talked and talked, but nothing seemed to move forward. She heard a noise behind her and turned around. 4 small figures crept into the lounge, their movements quick and silent. They were cubs, children of the diplomats currently locked in another endless discussion about trade routes and territorial boundaries. The cubs looked like small versions of their parents. Their bodies were covered in scales that shifted colors depending on their mood and surroundings. Right now, the scales showed patterns of blue and green, which had learned meant curiosity mixed with boredom. They had large eyes that could see in almost complete darkness, and their fingers ended in retractable claws that clicked softly against the metal floor. The largest cub approached her carefully. His name was, and he was the son of Elder N, one of the senior military advisors, tilted his head and made a chirping sound that the translator device on his collar converted to words. "How long will they talk today?" asked. Smiled sadly. "Probably many more hours, I'm sorry, I know it's boring for you." The other 3 cubs gathered around. Was smaller than, with brighter scales that flickered between purple and orange, and were twins, identical except for a small scar on his left arm. All 4 cubs looked at with hopeful expressions. "Can you teach us something?" asked. "Anything. We've been sitting in the waiting room for 3 days. There's nothing to do." Thought for a moment. She had been a kindergarten teacher back on Earth before she joined the diplomatic corps. She knew how restless young children could become when forced to sit still for too long. These cubs needed something active, something fun. "I know a game," she said. "It's something human children play. Would you like to learn?" All 4 cubs made excited chirping sounds. Their scales brightened instantly, shifting to yellows and golds that meant happiness and interest. Led them to the station's recreation area. It was a large room filled with various equipment for different species. There were climbing structures, water features, and open spaces, perfect for what she had in mind. "The game is called hide and seek," explained. "One person is the seeker. They close their eyes and count to 30. While they count, everyone else hides somewhere in this room. When the seeker finishes counting, they have to find all the hidden players. The last person found becomes the seeker in the next round." Scales rippled with confusion. "That's all, just hide and find." "That's all," confirmed. "It's simple but it's fun, trust me." The cubs looked at each other, communicating with small gestures and color changes that couldn't fully understand yet. Finally, stepped forward. "I will seek first," announced. "Help stand in the center of the room facing a wall. Close your eyes and count to 30 out loud," she instructed. "No peeking." As began counting in the clicking language, quickly moved to hide behind a large storage container. She found a spot where she could crouch down and stay out of sight. She heard the other cubs scattering in different directions. When reached 30, the cub turned around and opened its eyes. Watched from her hiding spot as began to search. The cub moved methodically, checking behind equipment and under tables. Within 2 minutes, found hiding inside a climbing tube. But then something strange happened. Walked right past the container where was hiding. The cub even looked directly at her spot, but its eyes seemed to see nothing. Stayed still, confused. She wasn't that well hidden. 10 minutes passed, found nothing else. The cub made frustrated clicking sounds and called out, "I give up, where are you?" Emerged from behind a water feature, his scales rippling with amusement. "I was right there," he said. "You looked at me 4 times." Uncurled from a position near the ceiling, clinging to a support beam. "And I was above you the whole time." Stood up from her hiding place, stared at her in shock. "But I checked there, how did I not see you?" Suddenly understood. The cubs had used their natural camouflage abilities. Their scales had changed to match their surroundings perfectly. had looked exactly like the blue-gray wall behind him, had mimicked the dark metal of the ceiling beam. Even young cubs had incredible control over their appearance. "You cheated," said, but there was no anger in the words. The cub's scales showed bright orange patterns that meant excitement. "No," said slowly. "You all used your natural abilities. That's not cheating, that's just playing to your strengths." The cubs looked at each other again, then began making a sound that the translator identified as laughter. Soon all 4 cubs were laughing, their scales flashing rapid patterns of gold and green. "Can we play again?" asked eagerly. "This is the most fun I've had in months." They played round after round, learned to look more carefully to spot the small signs that revealed hidden cubs, a shadow that didn't quite match, a slight shimmer when they breathed, the faint sound of claws gripping metal. But she rarely found them quickly. The cubs were natural experts at this game. They could hold perfectly still for long periods. They could flatten their bodies into narrow spaces. They could even slow their breathing to avoid making sounds. After the 6th round was exhausted, she sat down on a bench, breathing hard. The cubs gathered around her, all of them buzzing with energy. "This game is amazing," said. "Why do human children play it?" Wiped sweat from her forehead. "For fun, to learn about taking turns and following rules, to practice being quiet and patient." "It's training," said suddenly. "Like hunting practice, but better, more challenging." "It's just a game," insisted. "Human children don't think about hunting when they play." The cubs exchanged glances again. Their scales shifted to deep blues and purples, colors associated with serious thinking. The door to the recreation area opened. Eldarin entered, followed by 2 other adults. They had been searching for the cubs, wondering where they had disappeared to. "Father," rushed over to N. "You have to try this, taught us an amazing human game." Eldarin looked then at the other cubs who were all chattering excitedly. His scales remained a neutral gray, unreadable. "Show me," and said quietly. What followed was the strangest game of hide-and-seek had ever played. Eldarin watched intently as the cubs demonstrated. When it was his turn to hide, the adult simply stood in the middle of the room and changed his scale patterns. He became a perfect replica of the wall behind him, so perfect that walked right past him 3 times before pointed out where his father stood. When the game ended and approached, his scales showed deep purple, the color of intense thought. "You have given our children something valuable," he said. "This game teaches skills our traditional training does not. It teaches creativity, adaptation, thinking like prey and predator at the same time." "It's just a children's game," repeated, feeling a flutter of concern in her stomach, and made a sound like a low rumble. "On your world, perhaps. Here, you may have taught us something important." The elder left with the other adults, but he kept looking back at the cubs who were already begging to play just one more round. As she agreed and covered her eyes to count, wondered what she had started. It was just hide and seek, just a simple game she had played 1,000 times on Earth. But watching the cubs vanish into the shadows around her, blending perfectly with their environment, moving without sound, she realized that what was play for humans might be something very different for the. 3 weeks had passed since taught the cubs hide and seek. She thought they would play a few times and get bored, like children always did with games. She was very wrong. The cubs played every single day. They played during breaks between diplomatic sessions. They played before meals and after meals. They convinced other cubs to join them, and soon there were 12 young who knew the game. But they weren't playing the simple version anymore. The game had changed. Discovered this when the station's security officer knocked on her door at midnight. His face looked tired and frustrated. "We need to talk about your game," he said. Led her to the security center. The walls were covered with monitors showing different areas of the station. He pointed at screen after screen, showing error messages and confusing readings. For the past week, we've been getting reports of movement in restricted areas, explained. Life sign detectors going off in cargo bays, heat signatures in maintenance tunnels, but when we send teams to check, there's nothing there. Felt her stomach drop. The Cubs. The Cubs, confirmed. They're using the entire station as their playing field now. They've figured out how to move through air ducts, service corridors, places most adults can't access. And their camouflage is so good that our sensors can barely track them. I'll talk to them, said quickly. I'll tell them to stay in the recreation area. But held up his hand. That's the strange part. They're not causing any damage. They're not going into dangerous areas. They're just everywhere, and they're getting better at it. The next morning, called a meeting with all the Cubs who had learned hide and seek. They gathered in the recreation area, their scales showing guilty patterns of dark blue and gray. You can't play in the maintenance tunnels, said firmly. It's not safe, and it worries the security team. Who had become the unofficial leader of the group, stepped forward. But the game needs more space now. We know all the hiding spots in here. We need new challenges. Then make new rules for this room, suggested. More complicated rules. Scales brightened. We already did that. We have 43 rules now. Blinked 43. The Cubs began explaining their new version of hide and seek. There were rules about time limits, about moving between hiding spots, about working in teams. There were rules about using tools to create false trails, rules about sound discipline and shadow management. It sounded less like a children's game and more like a military training exercise. Maybe we should take a break from hide and seek, said carefully. I could teach you other human games. Have you heard of tag or red light, green light? But before the Cubs could answer, the recreation area door opened. Park Menu, the station commander, entered with 5 human children. They were kids of station personnel, ranging from about 5 to 10 years old. My daughter has been begging me for days, Menu said too. She heard about this game from the Cubs. Can the human children join? Looked at the eager faces of the human kids, then at the Cubs whose scales had brightened with excitement. She couldn't say no. Okay, she agreed. But we play in this room only, and we use the basic rules. None of this 43 rule stuff. The mixed game was chaos at first. The human children couldn't camouflage themselves like the could. They made more noise when they moved. They couldn't fit into the tiny spaces the Cubs used. But something interesting happened. The human children started thinking differently about the game. They created distractions. They set up decoys using clothing and equipment. They worked together in ways the Cubs hadn't considered, with one child making noise in one area while others hid elsewhere. Young, Commander Menu's daughter, came up with the idea of the hidden chain. 3 human children would hide in a line, each one able to see the next. When the seeker got close to one child, the next child in the chain would make a small noise to draw attention away. The Cubs watched this with fascination. Their scales rippled with colors had never seen before, complex patterns that her translator couldn't interpret. Approached after the game ended. Teach us that chain method, he said. In exchange, I'll teach you the shadow merge technique. Soon the 2 groups were sharing techniques. Human creativity combined with natural abilities. The games became incredibly sophisticated. Teams of mixed species formed naturally, each member contributing their strengths. Watched this with mixed feelings. On one hand, the children were bonding across species lines. Real friendships were forming. On the other hand, the game was becoming something she barely recognized. The turning point came 2 weeks later. A group of young adult, teenagers by human standards, asked if they could join the games. Then some human teenagers asked the same thing. Then some adults. The recreation area became crowded with players of all ages. The games grew more complex and competitive. Heard players using terms she had never taught them. Patrol patterns, blind spot analysis, extraction routes. she pulled aside one day. He was almost as tall as her now, having gone through a growth spurt common in young. "This isn't hide and seek anymore," she said. "You've turned it into something else." Scales showed confusion. "We're still hiding and seeking. We just got better at it." "Your training," said. "You've turned a children's game into a tactical exercise." "Is that bad?" asked. "We're learning, we're having fun. Isn't that what games are supposed to do?" Before could answer, alarms blared throughout the station. Everyone in the recreation area froze. His voice came over the intercom. "All personnel, we have a situation. Unknown contact just jumped into our sector. Not responding to hails. Could be hostile. Everyone stay calm and move to designated safe areas." The room erupted into controlled chaos as people moved toward the exits, but noticed something strange. The players, both cubs and adults, didn't panic. They moved with purpose, quickly and quietly. They had practiced moving without being detected so many times that it had become second nature. The human players followed this lead, mimicking their calm efficiency. Even Young moved with confidence, using techniques she had learned from playing with the cubs. The alert turned out to be a false alarm. The unknown contact was just a damaged cargo ship with a broken communication system, but the incident made think about what she had witnessed. That evening, she found Elder N in one of the station's observation lounges. He was watching the stars, his scales a peaceful blue-green. "Your game has spread beyond what you intended," and said before could speak. "You're concerned." "I taught children a simple game," said. "Now I see adults treating it like military training. That wasn't my intention." And was quiet for a moment. "On my world, we train our young for survival from the moment they can walk. It's necessary. Our history is full of dangers, but your game taught them something our traditional methods miss." "What's that?" "Joy," and said simply. "Our cubs learned to hide from threats. You taught them to hide for fun. They learned the same skills but without the fear, and the friendships they've formed with human children. Those bonds might be more valuable than any skill." Watched a group of mixed human and children pass by in the corridor outside. They were laughing together, planning their next game. Was riding on shoulders, and he was careful to keep his claws retracted so he wouldn't accidentally hurt her. "I still worry," admitted. "What if this becomes too serious? What if they forget it's supposed to be fun?" "Then you remind them," and said. "That's why you're here. Not to stop the evolution of the game, but to make sure its heart remains the same." A young adult approached them. His name was, and he was one of the older players who had recently joined the games. "Liaison," said formally. "I want to issue a challenge. My team against the station security team. Hide and seek security sector, 3 days duration." His eyes widened. 3 days, that's not a game, that's an exercise, and finished. And perhaps a useful one. Our security team could benefit from understanding how effective these techniques have become. Who had been walking past, stopped and overheard. His expression showed both skepticism and interest. "You really think you can hide from trained security personnel for 3 days?" asked. Scales showed confident gold patterns. "I know we can." Looked at, then at in, then back at. "You're on. But when we find you in the first hour, you have to stop playing in the maintenance tunnels." "Agreed," said. "And when we last the full 3 days, you have to join our next game." They shook hands on it, watched the challenge being set with a sense of dread. Her simple children's game was becoming something much bigger, and she had no idea how to stop it, or if she even should. And his team disappeared into the station's security sector exactly as promised. Security team, 12 trained professionals with advanced sensors and complete knowledge of the station layout, began their search immediately. 1 hour passed, no one found. 6 hours passed, the security team started looking frustrated. After 24 hours, stood in the security center, staring at his monitors with disbelief. "They're here somewhere. They have to be. Our sensors detected movement twice, but when we got there, nothing. Watched from the doorway. She felt guilty. This whole situation had spiraled out of her control. What had started as a way to entertain bored children had become a competition between civilians and trained security personnel. On the second day, one of the officers thought he spotted someone in a storage room. The team rushed there and found absolutely nothing. No heat signatures, no displaced air, nothing. They were chasing ghosts. The third day arrived. Looked exhausted. His team had been searching in shifts, but none of them had slept well. They knew they were being watched and couldn't find the watchers. When the 72-hour mark hit, and his 5 team members simply walked into the security center from different directions. They had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. One had spent 2 days disguised as a maintenance panel. Another had flattened himself in a ceiling ducked directly above the security chief's office. A third had matched her scales to a computer terminal and stood motionless for hours at a time. Kept his word. He joined their next game and learned more about his own station in one session than he had in months of regular patrols. News of the challenge spread quickly throughout Horizon's Edge. What it created wasn't just a game anymore. It was a phenomenon. 3 days after successful challenge, Elder and requested a formal meeting with and Commander Minu. They met in a conference room normally used for diplomatic negotiations. And scales showed serious purple patterns. The military leadership has been observing the hide-and-seek activities. We want to formally study it as a training protocol. Felt her heart sink. It's a children's game, not a military exercise. It's both, and said calmly. We've documented improvements in spatial awareness, team coordination, and adaptive thinking among all participants. Cubs who play regularly score 40% higher on traditional survival assessments. Adults who participate show enhanced threat detection abilities. Commander Minu leaned forward with interest. You're saying this game has measurable benefits. Significant ones, and confirmed. We'd like Liaison to consult on developing a formal training program based on hide-and-seek principles. No, said immediately. I won't help turn a children's game into a weapon. We're not weaponizing anything, and said. We're recognizing that play can be a valid form of learning. Your species understands this already. You teach human children through games all the time. Why is it different when we do it? Didn't have a good answer for that. She excused herself from the meeting and went to the observation lounge to think. She found there. The young was almost fully grown now, his scales darker and more controlled than they had been months ago. You're angry about Elder N's proposal, said. It wasn't a question. I don't want to see something innocent turned into another military tool, admitted. Was quiet for a moment. Can I show you something? He led her to a common area where a group of cubs were playing with human children. But they weren't playing hide and seek. They were playing a game that involved complex pattern recognition and color coordination. The human children were laughing, struggling, but enjoying the challenge. Taught them that game last week, explained. It's a game cubs play to develop camouflage control, but the human children love it even though they can't change colors. They're learning about patterns and strategy instead. Watched the mixed group playing together. They were genuinely having fun. We're not making hide and seek into war, continued. We're making war more like hide and seek. Do you understand the difference? Before could respond, her communicator beeped. It was Commander Minu asking her to return to the conference room. There was someone new she needed to meet. The someone new was Lieutenant, a human special forces operator visiting the station. She wore a military uniform and had the bearing of someone who had seen combat. Her expression was skeptical. Commander Minu tells me a children's game has military applications, said bluntly. With respect, that sounds ridiculous. I agree, said, relieved to find someone on her side. Which is why I'm proposing a demonstration, and said. A joint exercise between Lieutenant's team and a group trained in advanced hide-and-seek tactics. A simple scenario. The hide-and-seek team must infiltrate a secured area and retrieve an objective without being detected. Smiled confidently, and my team provides security. Correct. Done. When do we start? The exercise was scheduled for the following week. Brought in 3 other Special Forces operators. They were given complete control over a cargo bay complex, which they secured with sensors, patrols, and multiple checkpoints. The objective was a data pad placed in the center of the most protected room. The hide-and-seek team consisted of 6 who had been playing the game for months, including and 2 human teenagers who had become experts at human coordination tactics. The exercise began at midnight. The team was confident. They had military training, advanced equipment, and complete knowledge of the area they were defending. 2 hours later, one of soldiers noticed the data pad was missing. They checked the recordings and saw nothing. No one had entered the secured area. The sensors had detected nothing unusual. The data pad was returned the next morning with a note attached. "Thanks for playing." Was furious at first, convinced there had been some technical malfunction. But after reviewing every sensor log and camera feed, she found what had happened. The hide-and-seek team had moved through blind spots in the sensor coverage that Evan's trained eye had missed. They had timed their movements to patrol patterns, slipping past guards during the brief moments when attention shifted elsewhere. They had used their camouflage not to become invisible, but to blend with expected elements of the environment. A human teenager had walked right past a checkpoint by acting like a bored maintenance worker, clipboard in hand. "It's not about being invisible," explained to a stunned afterward. "It's about being uninteresting, about fitting into the environment so well that no one thinks to look at you." Sat down heavily. "I've had 3 years of Special Forces training. You learned this from a game." "We learned it from playing with humans," corrected. "Are naturally good at camouflage, but humans taught us about misdirection, about understanding how people think and what they expect to see. The combination is more powerful than either alone." That evening and approached again. "The Council wants to propose something ambitious, a sector-wide hide-and-seek tournament, multiple species, multiple stations, a friendly competition to share techniques and build relationships." "That's not a tournament," said. "That's a political event." "Yes," and agreed. "It is. Ambassador Lee believes it could help with several ongoing diplomatic negotiations. Species who won't talk to each other about trade routes might be willing to compete in a game." Ambassador Lee confirmed this the next day. "We've been trying to get thee and the to negotiate for months, but the think thee are arrogant and the think thee are primitive. Neither side will compromise." "And you think a hide-and-seek tournament will fix that?" asked. "I think it might give them a reason to see each other differently," Lee said. "We've invited 12 species. They're all interested. Some are sending military observers. Others are treating it like a cultural festival, but they're all coming." Felt overwhelmed. "This is too much. This is way too much. I just wanted to play a game with some bored kids." Ambassador Lee smiled gently. "And look what you started. You proved that sometimes the best diplomacy isn't formal negotiations. It's finding common ground through shared experiences, even if that common ground is a children's game." Over the next weeks, species from across the sector sent their teams. The who lived in hive-mind colonies approached the game as a collective. The who could partially phase out of normal space had their own unique strategies. The brought mathematical prediction models. Even the usually isolationist sent observers. Watched the preparations with a mix of pride and fear. What she had created was bringing people together, yes, but it had also become something far larger and more complex than she had ever imagined. The night before the tournament began, she found and in the recreation area where they had first played hide and seek. "I'm scared," admitted. "What if this goes wrong? What if people get hurt? What if this makes things worse instead of better? Scales showed soft, comforting colors. Then we'll learn from it. That's what games teach us. How to try, how to fail, how to try again. And you'll be there with us, added. You're not just the person who taught us the game, you're part of our team. Realized he was right. She had started this for better or worse. Now she needed to see it through. The tournament turned Horizon's Edge into something had never seen before. Species that normally avoided each other now filled the station's corridors, talking, observing, preparing. There was excitement in the air, but also tension. This competition would prove something about each species, though no one could agree on exactly what. The arrived first, 40 individuals moving as one coordinated unit. They shared thoughts through biological radio signals, making them perfect at synchronized movement. When one knew something, all of them knew it instantly. The came next, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells. They could phase partially into other dimensions, making them nearly impossible to detect with normal sensors. They moved with an arrogance that annoyed many of the other species. They brought computers and probability calculators. They were small, insect-like creatures who believed that everything, including hiding, could be predicted through mathematics. They had calculated the optimal hiding spots in every venue before even arriving. They surprised everyone by actually participating instead of just observing. They were large, slow-moving beings covered in thick fur. Nobody expected them to be good at hiding, but they had their own methods to share. 12 species total. Each brought unique abilities and approaches to the game. The tournament would take place across 5 different stations over 2 weeks, with different environments and challenges at each location. Had agreed to be an official consultant, explaining the original rules and spirit of the game. But she had also formed a team with, and 3 human players including, who was now 12 and had become remarkably skilled at the game. The opening ceremony was held in Horizon's Edge's main gathering hall. Commander Minu gave a speech about cooperation and cultural exchange. Ambassador Lee talked about how play could build bridges between species, but everyone was really just waiting for the games to begin. The first round was traditional hide and seek in a controlled environment. Each team had 30 minutes to hide anywhere in a designated section of the station. Seekers had 3 hours to find them. Points were awarded based on how long each team member remained hidden. The won easily. Their phase-shifting ability meant they were barely present in normal space. Sensors couldn't track them. Visual searches failed. They were too powerful for the basic version of the game. But the second round changed the rules. Teams had to hide in ways that a member of another species could find them. Thus, dimensional tricks became useless when mathematical calculations could predict exactly where a phase-shifted being would create quantum disturbances. This hive-mind coordination ran into problems when human players used randomness and unpredictability. The expected patterns and logic. Humans provided neither. This perfect calculations failed against the, who didn't hide in optimal spots, but rather in places that felt right to them emotionally. Mathematics couldn't predict intuition. This mixed human team did something different. They played the game exactly as had originally taught it, with simple strategies and genuine enjoyment. They didn't always win, but they had fun, and other species started noticing. "Why do your players laugh so much?" a coordinator asked after one round. "They just lost." "Because it's a game," explained. "Losing can be fun if you enjoyed the playing." The coordinator's collective mind seemed to process this idea slowly. Fun wasn't something they had much experience with. Everything in their culture served a purpose, filled a role, contributed to the hive's survival. After the first week, something unexpected happened. Teams started mixing. A few individuals asked to play with the human teenagers, wanting to learn about unpredictability. Some taught about reading environments. The humbled by their limitations in later rounds, actually asked for help understanding mathematical prediction. The tournament was building exactly the kind of bridges Ambassador Lee had hoped for. Species were learning from each other, not through formal cultural exchanges, but through play. Then the alarm started. It was day 9 of the tournament. Teams were competing in an asteroid station called Waypoint 7. The games were interrupted by urgent warnings from long-range sensors. Unknown ships entering the sector, the station's automated system announced. Configuration matches scout vessels, all personnel to alert status. They had heard of them. Everyone had. They were an aggressive species that had been expanding their territory for decades, consuming weaker civilizations. They were excellent fighters, ruthless strategists, and they never negotiated. Commander Park Minu's voice came over the communication system. All tournament participants were suspending the games. They have sent a scout fleet into our sector. This is not a drill. The gathering hall filled with worried conversations in a dozen different languages. The scouts meant a larger invasion force wasn't far behind. They were evaluating the sector's defenses, looking for weaknesses. Found herself in an emergency meeting with Minu, Ambassador Lee, Elder N, and military representatives from all 12 species. A holographic display showed the fleet, 20 ships moving in perfect formation, scanning everything. They ignored all communication attempts, just as they always did. "They're testing our response," Lieutenant said. She had stayed for the tournament and now looked grimly at the tactical display. "Looking for defense patterns, response times, coordination levels between our species." "We should show strength," the military observer stated. "Demonstrate unified force." "They'll expect that," the commander countered. "Traditional military response. They've fought dozens of species. They know how we think." "What if they don't know how we play?" said quietly. Everyone turned to look at the young. His scales showed confident gold patterns despite the serious situation. "They are scouts," continued. "They're looking for something specific. Military installations, ship concentrations, communication patterns. What if they find none of that?" "You mean evacuate?" someone asked. "No," said I mean hide." Silence filled the room. Then Elder and began making the low, rumbling sound that meant deep thought. "Hide an entire sector," Lieutenant said. "That's impossible." "We've spent 2 weeks learning how to hide from each other," said, entering the meeting room. He had been coordinating security for the tournament. 12 species, each with different detection methods. We've learned what works against each type of sensor, each kind of search pattern. "The scouts are looking for an active, defended sector," realized, her mind racing. "What if they find what looks like an abandoned sector instead?" Commander Minu stood up straight. "Are you seriously suggesting we play hide and seek with an invasion fleet?" "Not a game," Eldarin said slowly. "A strategic application of techniques we've learned through play. We power down everything non-essential, make the sector look empty, worthless. When they come looking, they find nothing worth invading." The representative's antennae twitched rapidly. Probability of success is impossible to calculate. Too many variables. "Good," one of the human teenagers said from the doorway. Several of the young tournament participants had gathered there, listening. "That means they can't calculate it either." The room erupted into arguments and discussions. Some thought the idea was insane. Others thought it might work. But as they debated, noticed something interesting. The military leaders from different species were actually talking to each other, sharing ideas, building on each other's suggestions. The tournament had already taught them how to communicate and cooperate in ways formal diplomacy never had. Finally, Ambassador Lee made a decision. "We'll try it. Every species will contribute. This is voluntary. Any species that wants to evacuate can do so. But I believe we can make this work." One by one, the representatives agreed. They would coordinate power management across all stations, making energy signatures disappear. They would phase shift larger objects to make them undetectable. They would calculate false debris fields to make the sector look abandoned. They would teach camouflage techniques to species who needed them. Humans would coordinate the unpredictable elements that would confuse this analytical predictions. The plan came together with surprising speed. 2 weeks of playing together had taught these species how to work together. They understood each other's strengths and limitations. They had built trust through the most unlikely means possible. "We have approximately 40 hours before the scouts reach our main stations," reported. "That's our timeline, 40 hours to hide an entire sector." Looked around the room at the representatives from 12 species, all preparing for the most important game of hide and seek ever played. She had started this by teaching 4 bored cubs a simple children's game. Now that game might save thousands of lives. "One thing," said, and everyone stopped to listen. "In hide and seek, the best hiding spots are the ones where you can see the seeker, where you can watch them walk right past you. We shouldn't just disappear, we should be ready." Elder and scales show deep purple, the color of profound respect. The prey becomes the predator. "If they come looking for a fight," Commander Minu said grimly, "they'll find nothing. And when they drop their guard, searching for ghosts in an empty sector, they'll discover they're the ones being hunted." The meeting ended. Everyone rushed to their tasks. The sector-wide hide-and-seek exercise had begun, with stakes far higher than any tournament. The great hiding began exactly 37 hours before the scouts would reach the sector's core stations. Every species threw themselves into the effort with an intensity that surprised even. The coordinated power systems across all stations simultaneously. Lights dimmed. Life support dropped to minimal levels. Energy signatures that would normally scream "civilization here" faded to almost nothing. Stations that should have been blazing beacons in space became cold, dark rocks. They worked with station engineers to phase shift entire sections of larger installations into dimensional pockets. Not gone, just undetectable to normal sensors. Weapon systems, command centers, anything that looked valuable or strategic simply vanished from standard detection methods. They created elaborate debris fields using real abandoned equipment and carefully calculated holographic projections. They made the sector look like it had been picked clean by salvagers decades ago. Old battles, dead colonies, nothing worth investigating. They taught crash courses in camouflage theory to species who had never considered it. How to match your environment, how to blend with expectations, how to be present but unnoticed. And the humans did what humans did best. They added chaos to the order, random heat signatures that appeared and disappeared, sensor ghosts that led nowhere, communication bursts that sounded like old equipment malfunctioning. Nothing that made sense, nothing that could be predicted, nothing that looked like organized resistance. Found herself coordinating between species, translating not just language but intent and strategy. The 2 weeks of tournament play had given her insights into how each species thought and planned. She knew the needed precise timing, the needed to feel respected, the needed to understand the logic behind each decision. The humans needed to feel creative freedom. "This is insane," muttered as he helped coordinate personnel movements. "We're hiding entire populations in plain sight." "That's exactly what we practiced for 2 weeks, reminded him. "We just didn't know we were practicing for this." 30,000 people across 5 stations and 24 ships all playing the same game, all hiding together, all trusting techniques learned through play to protect them from real danger. Lieutenant coordinated the military aspects. She positioned combat-ready teams in hiding spots throughout the sector, not to fight immediately but to watch, to wait, to be the eyes that saw the scouts searching empty space. "Remember," told her teams, "you're not trying to be invisible, you're trying to be forgettable, part of the background, expected and boring." The scouts arrived exactly on schedule, 20 ships in precise formation. They moved through the sector methodically, scanning everything. Their sensors were powerful, their search patterns thorough. They found nothing. Watched from a hidden observation post on Horizon's edge. The station's main power was down. Only emergency systems ran, hidden deep in the station's core. She sat in darkness with and several other team members, watching the ships on a minimal power monitor. "They're confused," whispered. His scales had shifted to match the dark walls around him. "Their formation is breaking slightly. That's uncertainty." He was right. The ships slowed their advance. The areas they had already checked. They found old debris, dead stations, random energy fluctuations that led nowhere. The sector looked abandoned, destroyed, worthless. One ship came very close to Horizon's edge. It passed within a few thousand kilometers, its sensors washing over the station. Held her breath. Everyone on the station held their breath. The ship found nothing interesting. It moved on. "It's working," breathed, her scales flickering with excitement before she controlled them back to camouflage patterns. For 6 hours they searched. They investigated every station, every asteroid, every piece of space that might hide something valuable. They found exactly what the defenders wanted them to find, nothing worth conquering. Then they made their mistake. They gathered together to analyze their findings, all 20 ships in a close formation near the sector's edge. They were discussing what to report to their invasion fleet. Should they recommend moving forward with conquest? Or was this sector already dead, not worth the resources? That's when Commander Minu gave the signal. All across the sector, stations powered up simultaneously. Ships that had been drifting like dead debris came alive. Weapon systems emerged from dimensional phase shifts. The empty sector suddenly revealed itself to be very, very full. But there was no attack. Not yet. The defenders simply appeared, surrounding the scout fleet from every direction. They found themselves in a trap they hadn't even known they were entering. "This is Commander Park Minu of Horizon's Edge to the fleet," Minu's voice broadcast across all channels. "You are surrounded. Your sensors told you this sector was empty. They were wrong. Every station, every ship, every person you failed to detect is now targeting your position. You have one chance to withdraw peacefully." They didn't respond immediately. Imagine their confusion. How had an entire populated sector hidden from their advanced sensors? How had they walked into a trap without seeing any signs of it? Finally, a response came. The voice was harsh, translated by automated systems into understandable language. "Explain how you concealed yourselves. Our technology should have detected any defense preparations." "We weren't preparing for war," Ambassador Lee responded. "We were playing a game. You wouldn't understand." There was a long pause. Then the scout fleet began moving, backing away slowly, weapons still charged but not firing. They maintained defensive positions as they retreated to the edge of the sector. "This sector is under the protection of the Unified Gaming Alliance," Ambassador Lee announced, making up the name on the spot. 12 species in cooperation. You're welcome to attempt invasion, but now you know what you'll face. An enemy you cannot predict, cannot detect, and cannot understand." The ships jumped away, fleeing to hyperspace. They had come looking for an easy target and found something completely outside their understanding. Cheers erupted across the sector. Every station, every ship, every hiding spot filled with celebrating people from 12 different species. They had done it. They had hidden from and then ambushed a superior military force using nothing but techniques learned from a children's game. Found herself swept up in the celebration. Lifted her onto his shoulders, just like used to ride when she was younger. Scales blazed with colors had never seen, joy expressed in patterns that needed no translation. Later, after the initial excitement faded, a formal analysis was conducted. The fleet had been completely deceived. Their after-action reports, intercepted by intelligence services, showed total confusion. They had never encountered an enemy that could make themselves undetectable using methods their technology couldn't counter. They're predators, Eldarin explained to a gathered council of military leaders. They understand hunting, they understand fighting, they don't understand playing, and that made all the difference. Lieutenant studied the tactical reports with something like wonder. We coordinated 30,000 people across multiple locations without any of them panicking or breaking cover. That level of discipline usually takes years of military training. We learned it in 2 weeks of playing games. Not just discipline, corrected quietly. Trust. Every person hiding trusted that everyone else was hiding too. Every team trusted the other teams. We built that trust through play. The representative, whose calculations had predicted the plan's failure, made a gesture of confusion. The probability of success was impossibly low, multiple variables that couldn't be controlled, yet it worked. Mathematics can't calculate for imagination, one of the human teenagers said, or for people having fun while they work. Over the following weeks, the sector's defense became famous across known space. Other regions wanted to learn the techniques. Species that had been isolated for generations suddenly wanted to join this unified gaming alliance that had defeated the without firing a shot. But noticed something more important. The 12 species that had participated weren't going back to their old separated ways. They had tasted cooperation, felt the strength of working together, and they wanted more. They opened there to cultural exchanges, something they had never done before. The humbled by the experience, asked them to teach them about working with species they had previously dismissed. The proposed permanent ambassadorial positions on Horizon's edge. You changed everything, Ambassador Lee told one evening as they watched new diplomatic agreements being signed. One simple game. I just wanted to help some bored kids, said. I never imagined any of this. The best things usually start that way, Lee replied. Small, innocent, just trying to make someone smile. Then they grow into something nobody could have predicted. Found and the original 4 cubs, now young adults in the recreation area. They were teaching a new generation of even younger cubs the basic rules of hide and seek. The simple version. The fun version. The version that wasn't about tactics or military strategy, but just about enjoying the game. Will you join us? Asked. Smiled always. Years passed. Hide and seek became a recognized training method across multiple species military academies. Tactical recreation theory became an actual field of study. Universities offered courses on the psychology of play and cooperation. But in a quiet corner of Horizon's edge, in the same recreation area where it all started, the game continued in its original form. Children of all species gathered there, learning to hide, learning to seek, learning to laugh together. Now promoted to Chief Cultural Officer for the Unified Gaming Alliance, still made time to visit. She watched new friendships form between species that had been strangers. She watched trust build through play. She watched cooperation grow from shared joy. A young human child approached her one day. Teacher, can you teach us a new game? Thought about all the games she knew. Tag, red light, green light, duck, duck, goose. Simple children's games that might somehow change the world again. I know a lot of games, said. What do you want to learn? The child looked at the mixed group of humans and others playing together. Whatever game teaches us to be friends. Smiled, that's easy. Every game does that if you play it right. She gathered the children in a circle and began explaining the rules of tag. In another part of the sector, military strategists studied defensive formations. Diplomats negotiated trade agreements. Scientists shared research discoveries. But here, in this room, the real foundation of their alliance continued. Not in formal agreements or strategic planning, but in children playing together, learning that cooperation could be fun, and that sometimes the best way to prepare for tomorrow was simply to play today. The Never returned. Other aggressive species heard the story and chose to avoid the sector entirely. Not because they feared the military strength, they could match that, but because they couldn't understand how to fight an enemy whose greatest weapon was knowing how to play. And in that small recreation area on Horizon's Edge, the game continued. Hide and seek, played by children who didn't know they were making history. They just knew they were having fun, making friends and learning that sometimes the best hiding spot is right out in the open, surrounded by friends who know where you are but keep your secret anyway. Because that's what the game had always been about. Not hiding from each other, but learning to trust each other enough to be found.